Hey everyone, good evening. Welcome to Fiveable session on the Baroque Art. My name is Liam Macklin. I'm a teacher, AP Europe teacher. I also teach APUSH. I teach an MSH in Long Island in New York. Um, and today it's a very interesting stream for anyone who likes art. We're going to talk about the Baroque art. Also, some people says Baroque. So, talk about the different pronunciation of the term, and we'll get some context about this art movement. So, let's see. Anybody online can say hi. Let's see how many people we have here. One live person. Okay. All right. So we're starting slow. Um, let's go over some of the basics. So remember, think Fiveable, follow Fiveable on Twitter, Instagram, on YouTube. Great to watch the replays if you get the subscription, so you can watch all the replays. Great preparation for the tests. Going up into the future, I'll be hosting several more streams this month. There's a lot of other streams coming up in AP Europe, so just try to check them up. Keep following what's going on. For me specifically, I'm going to host two more streams in October about the English restoration of the monarchies. So the first stream is going to be on October 14. We're going to talk about the Stuart absolutism, talk about James the First and his son Charles the First, famous king who got chop executed, and we'll reach into the English Civil War. We'll talk about Oliver Cromwell and everything that led to that. So it's a lot of action in English during that time. And then the second stream, a week later, we're going to talk about the Restoration, how they brought back Charles II after Oliver Cromwell, and how his brother James II basically messed everything up for England. And then they ended up going with the famous Glorious Revolution, which does not get too much attention. For most AP Europe student, everyone knows the French Revolution or the American Revolution, but the Glorious Revolution was before both of these revolutions. So that's a very interesting topic. And there was a DBQ about it a few years ago. So that's kind of like a big topic. So anyway, join me for both of these streams. Anybody else online want to say hi? Tell us where you're from. Give us some updates. Anyone? Got 4 people up. We have also a poll going on throughout the stream. We're going to talk about who is your favorite painter. So you might not know some of these painters, but as we go along, you might actually form an opinion about these painters, who is your favorite one, as we go along. So continuing to go on specifically about the stream today. And if you have any question, by the way, in the box in the bottom, just post your question. I'll try to get to all of these questions as we go along. We're going to continue in the stream today, so let's get into it. So today we'll talk about in this stream about what is Baroque art, specifically what kind of a form of art movement is that. Everyone knows a little bit about the Renaissance or modern art, a little bit less about Baroque art, so this is a great stream to learn about that. And then we'll talk about some specific painters from the Baroque art. The most famous of them, we'll talk about, of course, the biggest one, Caravaggio, who was basically the most influential painter of the Baroque era. We'll talk about Bernini, who did a lot of things other than being a painter. He was more probably famous as a sculptor. And then we'll talk about woman artists. So that's a great, if you need an example of a female during Baroque/Renaissance time. So we'll talk about Gentileschi, who was a very, very famous artist, had a very interesting life, the daughter of a painter. And then we'll do a compare and contrast between Baroque and Renaissance, similarities, differences. I have a chart for that. And finally, we'll go just a little bit beyond Italy and talk about some influence of Baroque in the Netherlands. We'll talk about one of the most famous Dutch painters, Rembrandt van Rijn, and we'll talk about his influence of the Baroque area. I'm also going to do next month a stream just about the Golden Age, the Dutch Golden Age. So we'll talk about their famous art and what made them a superpower. So that's a whole different stream. We'll probably mention Rembrandt in that location situation. Okay, does anybody online want to say hi, want to make a comment, anything? Everyone can hear me loud and clear? Just give me a thumbs up. Everyone can see the slides? I'm just working on this microphone from last week. I'm hoping it goes well. Anyone? Anything? Let me see how many people we got going on now. Okay, people are joining in. So yeah, make a post, say hi, react, or say something. All right, so let's get into it. So let's start first from the Baroque art. So what does the term actually Baroque mean? So it's actually a Portuguese word, and it refers to, in Portuguese, if you want to pronounce it, it's called Baroque, and it refers to a flawed pearl. So if you want to compare and contrast, think about the Renaissance as a perfect pearl, and think about the Baroque as a kind of deformed, a flawed pearl. So it's kind of, it started up as a derogatory term for the Baroque as kind of being like a very flawed kind of art, not a perfect art like the Renaissance, but later on from derogatory term, it's kind of a term that they embrace. You had like a lot of sailors from Portugal coming back and bringing all these beautiful pearls, and some of them were a little bit deformed, so they said call them Baroque, and that later on became the name of the movement. Now, the years of the movement, Baroque, if we have the history of art, so we have the Renaissance, then we have Mannerism, which is kind of like late Renaissance, and then we have Baroque. So Baroque generally is from the 1600s to the 1750s, and it's actually spread all around the world. We can call it maybe the first world art movement. It basically spread all around the world, not just in Europe, it even reached the Americas. So it's very, very important. Origins, like the Renaissance, also compare and contrast, it started in Rome, Italy. Now, Baroque is not just about painting and art. It also includes music. So, for example, a lot of people do not know that the opera is actually a Baroque invention. So we have a lot of famous artists that created, like Mozart during that time created. So that's Baroque kind of music. It's also in architecture. So it's basically the first global art movement. Now, why did the Baroque movement started? Baroque. So the context is two historical contexts. One, it's a part of the Counter-Reformation, Council of Trent. They basically used Baroque art as a way to fight the spread of Protestantism. They wanted this art to enhance the belief of certain people and to slow down the Protestant Reformation. And another aspect of the Baroque art is absolute monarchs, which you're going to have several stream on that, embrace Baroque art because they wanted to showcase their strength, to show the divine right theory and many other aspects of that. So kind of like Louis XIV Versailles Palace is a classic example of absolute monarch embracing the Baroque art. So as mentioned, the next thing, the Baroque art was larger than life, meant to escape the boundaries, overpower the viewer. So the art was really there to really shock the viewer, to make him think outside of the box. And it really went for the emotional aspect, kind of like a theater. If you think about, we're going to see some paintings soon, if you think about going into the theater and turning off the lights and then just a flicker of light just coming over in the middle of the scene, so it's kind of action drama. That's basically what the Baroque is all about. And finally, the Baroque eventually gave way when it finished to a new form of movement, and that's the Rococo art. So you're going to see a stream about Rococo art later on. So that's basically 101. What is the Baroque art? When did it start? And the context, okay? And if you have any questions, put it in the bottom of the screen. Now let's get back a little bit more into detail to the context. So how did the Baroque movement actually start? So again, the Baroque art, the context is the Counter-Reformation. As you've seen in the other streams, we have people like Martin Luther and his 95 Thesis. Basically, Europe exploded into the age of Reformation, and the Catholic Church was very slow to react to the whole idea of the Reformation. And then finally, in the Council of Trent, if you watched the streams previously about the Counter-Reformation or Catholic Reformation, Council of Trent from 1545 to 1563, which took place in Trento in northern Italy. One of the things that the popes and the monks, and one of the resolutions of this convention was they encourage artists to basically to create more images if Calvin and Luther were all about destroying and removing the images, they said, no, we need to create more images to engage the believers, to basically reaffirm their belief. So they wanted to create art that really to touch the emotion of the person so he cannot look away over that. So that's a very interesting point. If we get into the next context, if we look about art, that's a great also compare and contrast. How do Catholic view art and how do Protestant view art? So it's very, very easy today if you walk into a church very quickly to see if it's a Catholic church or a Protestant church. Anyone knows how you can tell the difference? How do you know if you're in a Catholic church or a Protestant church? Sarah? Jamie? So one way you can see if it's a Protestant or a Catholic church is by the amount of paintings or by the amount of statues. So Protestant, the focus is here, we can see in the image, is all about the book. Luther, sola scriptura, it's all about the text. Catholics believe the way you engage the believer is with a lot more paintings and images to engage, to connect to the story of Christ. So it's interesting, the POV of Catholics, as you see on the slide, versus the POV of Protestants. So the POV of Protestants, if you want to hear the word of God, it's in the scripture. And paintings and all these sort of things or statues, they're like basically idols, and you need basically to smash them. Now the Catholics' POV, their responses has said, what about the millions who can't read? Like, don't they deserve salvation? Can they need to see the word of God? So they need those images. So that's an interesting contrast between Protestant, it's all in the book. Catholics, they have to feel emotionally the connection, and it comes across with the statues and the paintings. That's how people feel Christ. They don't just see it in an image. So that's a great compare and contrast POV from both sides. Now let's talk more in details a little bit about the first and major painter of the time. And anytime if you have any comment or question, get into the chat box. Feel free to say hi or add a comment if you want. So the most important, the biggest artist of the Baroque is Caravaggio, and he is an Italian painter. Interestingly enough, his real name is Michelangelo, but there's already another famous Michelangelo, so he did not really use that name for too long. So his full name is Michelangelo Merisi de Caravaggio. So he was born in the town of Caravaggio, which is outside of Milan, and basically later in life just became known to everybody by his name Caravaggio, because there was already another famous Michelangelo, the big one, of course, the one who made David. Now, his personal life was very violent and very controversial. He even got convicted for killing a person. He got into several brawls, several events of violence throughout his life. And he many times got sent to jail. But that's a very interesting story. A lot of these violent artists, somehow they managed to get many times out of jail by having connection, by working, for high connected people in the church. He himself got released from jail several times with the help and the support of several establishment people. So the violent in the personal life comes across also in his art. He actually had a lot of his paintings were very, very violent, and he had excessive nudity in the painting, and that really shocked many of the viewers. But shock is one of the things the Baroque art movement was looking for, and Caravaggio gave it to them big time. Now, his big claim to fame is basically what many fellow Baroque artists will do. He's basically created, if you will, the startup of the playing with the light and the dark. So if we want to see Renaissance, the lights are on, like behind me in the painting, because you want to see everything clear. Caravaggio turns off the light completely and then just puts the light on one spot. So it's kind of like action scene, and the light just comes into the painting. And that the play on the light, that's something that all the Baroque artists after him, even like going to the Netherlands with like Rembrandt, they really were inspired by Caravaggio painting. It really transformed the way you look into a painting and the way to focus, how you play with the light. And the church really, really loved his skill because he did exactly what the Council of Trent was talking about to engage the believers. You cannot feel comfortable seeing a Caravaggio painting. We'll see a few of them in a few minutes, and you'll see that they're very like messy. There's a lot of blood. There's no way you can look. There's not the comfort of just looking into a painting behind and feel protected. He makes you feel things, and that's exactly what the Catholic Church loved. And that's why he got there was so much forgiveness for all the bad stuff that he did up to a certain amount of time. Once he killed a person, things got a little bit bad to worse for him. And we'll talk in a few minutes what happened after the killing a person, how that influences his art. So let's talk about some Caravaggio painting. This is what we see here is the card sharps. That's one of the first paintings that made a Cardinal del Monte to basically adopt Caravaggio and bring him into the palace, make him a painter for the Catholic Church. So anyone can tell me what's going on in this painting? Anyone can see. So in the test, they might want to ask you to analyze a painting. So anyone can tell me what's going on in this painting? All right. So basically what, I don't know if you noticed within the painting, but what you have here, it's actually Caravaggio is using the same person twice. So these are actually twins, but playing different roles. So you had a flair for the drama. So basically what we see here going into in this painting, we have this rich person here playing cards, and these two are basically trying to steal his money. So you see this person over here is like showing the numbers. This person here behind is reaching for the card. So it's kind of like an interesting play on using the same model twice, playing two different roles, kind of telling us that we in life can play two different roles. Sometimes the villain and sometimes the one who gets duped. This person has like more of like pink cheeks, and this one is kind of like more rough. You can see in the different feather situation. So this is the painting that gave Caravaggio a name in Rome and basically got him adopted to get into the next level of not just painting like people playing cards, but trying to do religious painting. So we're going to move and talk about the big works that he did in religious painting. He had a very big commission to do two paintings of Saint Matthew, which Caravaggio was very interested because Matthew was the big a sinner, something he was very interested in doing. So in the church, he did two paintings of Saint Matthew. This is the calling of Saint Matthew in front of us. And in case you know a little bit your New Testament, so Saint Matthew was a tax collector, which is like considered a very sinful thing in the Catholic Church to lend money. In Caravaggio, again, what's very, very interesting, what he's doing in this painting in front of us, he's actually, if you can see, the painting is divided into two parts. We have basically over here Saint Matthew in the middle here. He has a coin on top of his head to make sure that we know that he's a tax collector. And basically Jesus and Saint Peter on the right side. So we can divide the painting into two parts. Jesus and Peter on the left side, and Saint Matthew and all the sinful people are basically in a tax office. But what Caravaggio did, he basically took the same location where you have the card shop or all these kind of dives where Caravaggio used to hang, and basically brought Saint Matthew and Jesus into from 1,000+ years ago into modern Italy. So that's a painting that can connect to people. They're like, I know this place. And again, notice what we have here. We have the light coming in and basically illuminating over Saint Matthew. This is the calling that Christ is basically asking him to join him. And this is represented by the hand. This is the hand. We don't really see even Christ. He's not the focus. The focus is the hand pointing at Saint Matthew. And Saint Matthew is basically pointing with the hand like, what, me? I'm the one you're calling for? We have this person over here is looking down into the cards. He's not even paying attention. So the calling of Saint Matthew really opened many people to the talents of Caravaggio and the things that he can actually do. And it's interesting, the coinage that you see on top of his head. There's a coin here and there's coins in the bottom. So it's a very interesting painting. Now in the church, on the left side, there was the calling of St. Matthew, And on the opposite side was the Martyrdom of St. Matthew. And again, classic Caravaggio painting. Notice what's going on here. Again, we're talking about violence. This is the act of the killing of St. Matthew, which again is, you don't have to know too much about New Testament, but it's legendary that he got killed in Ethiopia. It's the story. We're not really sure about the details, but that doesn't matter right now. The interesting part is that the focus in this painting, usually the focus in a martyrdom is all about the martyr because he's the person that dies. But St. Matthew here is on the floor, and the person who is actually killing him, the sinner, again, is the focus. That's very interesting with Caravaggio. The sinners are a lot of times the sanctuary of the painting. Nobody was interested in seeing the bad guys getting all the focus, but somehow Caravaggio, maybe being a violent person himself, was very interested in putting the focus on them. So we see the second before the killing of St. Matthew is on the floor. We see the person here with the knife, and we see the angel basically reaching down, but we're not seeing Matthew necessarily reacting to that. We see the horror of everybody around the situation. And again, the classic thing about playing on the light. So if you ever see in your exam any painting, if you're always going to see dark and light, that will be a great telling sign that we're talking about Baroque art and painting. So it's interesting to have these two painting one next to the other. And this really made Caravaggio the hottest artist in Rome, really build his reputation. Any questions up till now? We're just going to go across and talk more several of his paintings. Okay, let's continue. We have the Crucifixion of Saint Peter. If you know the story of Saint Peter, him and Paul ended up going into Rome. Saint Peter is known as the first bishop of Rome, and that's the foundation of the whole idea of papacy in Rome. So he's a very, very important figure in Christianity. And the story goes is when Peter was crucified, he asked to be crucified upside down so there will not be any confusion between him and Jesus. So what we have to see here is the crucifixion of Saint Peter, and again, it's not glamorous. A lot of the Renaissance paintings saw everyone like looking beautiful with great colors. We're going to see like later a Renaissance painting to compare and contrast. Beautiful blue colors, green colors. Here we're seeing again the flesh. Look at Saint Peter. This is how an old person looks. This is very, very uncomfortable. It's a very shaky situation, and we see the three people involved in pulling the St. Peter. So that's another classic example of Baroque paintings, that they're in motion. If the Renaissance is very, very still, Baroque is very, very in movement. We see this person over here is pulling the rope. We see the second person here is lifting the bottom of the cross, and then we see the third person kneeling down and pushing up. So it's very, very unstable. It's very, very shaky. That's another classic example of what's going on in the Baroque art. So think about Baroque painting as motion and emotions of the people and stability. That's a very, very classic thing going on. And again, violent scenes. This is what makes Baroque art. It touches the believer to see and think about what Peter experienced, not a comfortable painting like a Renaissance painting. Any comments? Okay, if you have anything to say, just get into the chat box to make a comment. Let's continue. Here's another famous one. Judith beheading Holofernes, another famous painting by Caravaggio, and later on we'll talk about Gentileschi's version of the same painting. So again, the story is of Judith, who was an Israelite trying to help her people, basically seducing Holofernes, and then in the middle of the night she woke up and basically cut his throat. So again, this is not, we haven't seen things like this in Renaissance painting. We see her over here with the action. We see the blood coming out. So it's a very, very visceral painting, and it really, really influenced a lot of paintings like Gentileschi's we're going to talk about later. You can see the way she's reacting. She's like, I love the face. She's kind of like, am I doing this right? Like you can see our assistant is looking in a whole different way. And we can see, again, that moment of the action, the way it's proceeding. So it's very, very uncomfortable to see paintings like Caravaggio paintings. Very shocking painting to see. Even today, like 400 years later, it's still like, wow, look at this painting. There's no way you cannot react to it. If you're passing in a museum, you see a painting like that on the wall, it like brings you over. It's not something you can just feel comfortable behind just seeing that painting. The Death of a Virgin. That's a very interesting painting here. Again, usually the death of Mary, the mother of Christ, is very, very calm and very serene. But here, again, she's in a red dress. She's actually bloated up, and it's, again, a very uncomfortable scene. And the story behind this painting is that an order of nuns ordered this painting from Caravaggio, and when they saw it, they refused to pay for it. So, they're not getting what they want. And even worse, there was a rumor saying that he painted a prostitute for the model for this image. So, she's kind of bloated. That's not what people are thinking when they're thinking about Mary, the mother of Christ. Now, what's interesting here, I added a quote of Caravaggio when the way he described art, and he said, all works, no matter what or by whom, painted are nothing but childish trifles unless are made and painted from life. So Caravaggio was interested in real life situations. He was interested in people sitting in bars, as we saw over here in St. Matthew, in St. Matthew over here, or people playing cards, real people interested him. So what he did, and that's what's very interesting about his art, he took regular people from the outside in Italian society and basically painted them like they were in Jerusalem 1,500 years before that. So he was looking for realism in his painting and real people. Okay, so we're going to get to the last painting by Caravaggio, and that's a very, very interesting story behind this painting. It's called David with the Head of Goliath. So Caravaggio, just to finish his biography, got into a lot of trouble, killed a man, ended up escaping for Napoli, had to escape again to Malta. He had a lot of getting in trouble with the laws. So he was trying to get into the good side again of his former boss, the cardinal, and he made several paintings as a way of seeking redemption for the killing and for all the bad things that he did. And one of the last famous painting that he did was David with the Head of Goliath. But what you see, it's very interesting in this painting, David does not look very happy in this face. He kind of looks very sad. And again, the focus, one more time, about the villain. Now, interestingly enough, Caravaggio actually painted himself as Goliath. This is the image of Caravaggio, so it's self-portrait. It was kind of like him painting this painting, basically sending it back to the cardinal, as basically said, like, I'm sorry for what I've did, or, I heard there's a price for my head. Maybe this can make up for all the bad stuff that I did. But anyway, Caravaggio, on the way back to Rome, we don't know exactly all the detail, but he basically missed his ship, got sick, and basically died. Might have got stabbed. We don't know the details. But anyway, he died, barely reaching the age of 40, but creating a lot of art. He's probably considered one of the most famous, greatest Italian artists of all time, definitely the most famous Baroque painter of the time. So that's a little bit about Caravaggio. Let's move on and continue talking about other people. Let's talk about Gian Lorenzo Bernini, who's probably the most famous Baroque sculptor and architect, designing things like part of the St. Peter's Square that he designed and made very, very famous statue. Now, he was also a painter. He worked in the theater. He wrote plays. He acted in his plays. He was very, very highly well connected with the Pope and many people in Rome. He was made a knight even. He was brought into the Pope by the age of 8, and the Pope already saw the potential and basically told his father, who was also an artist himself, like, be careful that, he's going to surpass his father. So the Pope already saw the potential that he had. Now, other than his painting, the focus mainly on him, if we want to talk, is mainly about sculpture. For example, here we have the story of Apollo and Daphne. Basically, Apollo is chasing Daphne, and basically she's praying to the gods, and they're basically transforming her they're answering her prayers, and they're basically transforming her, turning into a lower leaf. So again, what's very, very Baroque versus Renaissance, a lot of the Baroque statues are kind of like more action, people in motion, moving, versus being very still, like, which is very Renaissance-like. Moving on, we have here a bust of a woman named Constance, and that's a woman that Bernini had an affair with. And this is very, very interesting about this bust, is the fact that, historically busts were only used for for funerals, or very on top of graves. They were considered something very, very conservative. But here, if you can look at this bust, this is very, very different from everything ever done before. We can see the shirt is kind of open. She looks a little bit more tempting. So it's a very, very interesting way. So Bernini basically was in love with this woman. He had an affair with her. She was married. It's a very interesting story about that. Also, these guys had a very interesting life. He had an affair with this woman, and then he found out his brother also has an affair with this woman. So he went basically and almost killed his brother and beat her severely. But the funny thing, she ended up going to jail, and the brother ended up going to jail, and nothing happened to Bernini. How does nothing happen to Bernini? Again, very highly connected with many, many people on the top of the hierarchy. So that's a famous bust with a very interesting story behind it. Another famous work of art by Bernini is David. And again, if this David is very, very different from the David that everyone knows, the David of Michelangelo. So the David Michelangelo looks like very immobile compared to this David. So again, this is everything we know in Baroque art. If we compare and contrast to the David of Michelangelo, we have here David actually in action, in motion. His body is tilting. So this is him throwing the rock, we're assuming, into Goliath. There's an action over here versus kind of like Renaissance statue, which are just kind of like counterposed, usually standing there like very immobile. So there's action, motion in the statue. So that's another very famous work of art by Bernini. Also, Bernini was involved in designing the colonnade in St. Peter's Square. If anyone ever is going to visit Italy, from just outside of St. Peter's Square, there's a whole round circle, and Bernini was involved in the design of this big thing that is kind of just around you, basically gives you like a big hug. And again, this is very Baroque. It's big, it's impressive, and that's something the Baroque art is trying to do. It's trying to overwhelm you. It's trying to impress you, because if something is so big and so magnificent, it must be the right religion. So the right religion is very, very important behind that. Any reaction to this up till now? Anybody been to Rome? Anyone see some of this art before? Dakota? Anyone? Say hi in the chat room if you have any comments, any reactions. And as we also have a poll going on, so you can react and figure out who's your favorite artist as we go along. 1 vote for Caravaggio, 1 vote for Gentileschi, even though we haven't seen anything by her. So somebody must have known her before this stream. All right, so let's continue. So this is probably the most famous sculpture done by Bernini, and that's the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa, my favorite. Yeah, okay, so yeah, somebody, okay, very good. So somebody's reacting. I'm liking this. So yes, this is considered the most famous work of art by Bernini, very, very influential. So the story behind it is Saint Teresa of Avila. She wrote about experiencing this overwhelming experience by being touched by an angel. So we see the angel over here with an arrow basically piercing Saint Teresa, and she's like overwhelmed. She's leaning back. So it's the ecstasy of Saint Teresa of Avila. And behind this, what you cannot see, there's also a group of people watching this whole event. So there's a whole basically show around of everyone watching this scene. We can see the bottom of her foot, like we just assumed, like her shoe. She's basically leaning back and falling. And again, All the Baroque art is very, very action, motion, emotion. So, and Saint Teresa of Avila, she's a very interesting character because she also kind of is a part of the Counter-Reformation, trying to help to reform the church. Her stories about her experiencing God or being touched by an angel, that ecstasy, becomes a very popular story. A lot of people are very, very interested in this whole mysticism experience. The church, by the way, for a while is not really excited about it. They're like thinking she might be involved in some witch situation. So she's being investigated about that. But later on, it turns out that the story that basically that she's inspiring people and she's helping the Counter-Reformation. She's not doing any damage. So very, very interesting, very powerful statue that talks about physicality, spiritual union with Christ, her connection with him. This is about being touched, and he's basically doing that. And you can also see like the cloth, everything is kind of like falling very, very delicate way to sculpt things like that. Marble, very, very talented. And that's John Lorenzo Bernini. Bernini, by the way, from all of his scandals and all of his violence, he actually lived, I think, one of the longest from all these artists. He made it to the age of 81, which is like amazing for these kind of type of people, and workaholic types. And he had like 11 children. So he had a very productive and interesting lifestyle. It was not all successes. He tried to build these 2 tall columns in St. Peter's Square, and they actually, one of them collapsed while he was building it. So it was not all success for him all the time. So anyone who's taking AP, you can learn from your failures. Nobody's perfect. You got to overcome it. He did it and became successful, and we're talking about him today, right? Let's give some female time now. Let's talk about a very famous female artist in the time. Even though I think in some textbooks she's mentioned as being Renaissance artist, she's definitely more Baroque, and that's Artemisia Gentileschi. And she is, interesting enough, she's the daughter of another painter. That's something I can also tell you if you want to generalize. Almost 80 to 90% of female artists during the Renaissance, Baroque, and so forth are usually daughters of painters. So it's not a coincidence. There's definitely a connection there. If you listen to the stream about females during the Renaissance, or if you're going to write an essay about females during the modern time, you have to know that it's basically upon their dads to give them, to decide if they're going to receive an education or if they will study art. So her dad was a very, very big supporter of her work, and her father was a friend of Caravaggio. So both she and her dad were very, very big fans of Caravaggio work. Now, she was also the first woman to be admitted into the Academy of the Arts of Florence, so kind of groundbreaking in that capacity. And she worked all around Europe. She worked in London and Naples, Florence, Geneva. Her painting topics are interesting. Also, she's mainly depicting women. So it's very interesting that she's picking women and the suffering of women that's usually coming across, and a lot of mystical historical paintings. That's another thing that she is talking about. So from letters that she wrote, where really she's seen the difficulties that she had in working to achieve commissions for her work and the competition. She basically depicts the hardship of being a woman during this time to create art, and she eventually suffered tremendously for her art. We're going to talk in a second about, actually, she was raped by one of the tutors that she had, a very famous painter her dad hired to help her, to teach her how to paint, and he raped her, and that really traumatized the rest of her life. And she tried to get, she had a horrific trial trying to explain that the person raped her and depict it, even was tortured to make sure that she's telling the truth. The person ended up going to jail, but again, with some connection, ended up leaving jail very quickly. So she was very angry at that, and that basically is the background to her trying to depict her rapist in this famous painting of Judith slaying Holofernes. So as you remember, we already saw Caravaggio doing exactly the same topic painting, but what Gentileschi did over here, she painted her rapist face over here. So this was basically her putting him back into the punishment that he might have actually deserved. And again, we kind of see again an action. Again, these women are actually pushing very, very hard down. They're all involved. You can see the three hands coming down and pushing the body. So there's a lot more action and determination in this face. If you want to compare and contrast versus what we talked earlier on Caravaggio over here, that this is kind of like, are we doing it right? This is correct? And she definitely probably saw the Caravaggio painting, and there's a lot of influence over here. We can see the similarities. And again, we notice the light, the shade. She was very, very influenced by Caravaggio. So she's a very, very famous painter. And she actually ended up working with Charles I of England. She was a painter in his court. Charles I was, we're going to get to that when we talk about England, was a very, very big fan of art. He spent a lot of money buying painting and bringing some of the greatest painters around the world. She ended up working for him, and also the famous, of course, Medici family in Florence. She worked for them for a while too. Another famous painting that she has is Susanna and the Elders from the book of Daniel, the story of the men who are trying to extort Susanna. They see her basically bathing in water in the lake, and they basically try to extort her, basically that they're going to tell stuff about her unless she sleeps with them, and ended up she eventually manages to prove that they were lying. But anyway, these are the kind of topics that were interesting to Gentileschi. A lot of time female being victims, females, basically the suffering of women by men. So she's a very, very interesting painter and artist. If you want to use her as an example in any test that you take during Baroque, Renaissance, and so forth about the statue of women, she can always be used an example. A very, very interesting painter. Even you can see that's self-portrait of herself that she did. She's interesting, like she took a big part of it. She was actually a very large woman in size, but she managed to make all that part disappear like from a certain angle. So that's pretty much about the Italian painters over here, but let's do a little maybe compare and contrast, talking about Baroque art versus Renaissance art. So more people actually probably know about Renaissance art than they know about Baroque art. So a couple of classic ways to compare them is that the Renaissance really shows stability in the painting. Everything is very, very calm. Now, as we definitely saw in the Baroque art, there's a lot of instability. There's a lot of people very, very in a shaky situation, like lifting the cross and you might fall down. It's very, very shaky situation. People are in motion and emotion. They're moving, versus in Renaissance painting, they're very, very immobile. So if we look at a classic Renaissance painting, this is the one that I'm thinking about, Raphael, Madonna and the Meadows. You see it's very calm, very serene, a lot of light, just one relaxing moment, versus these kind of paintings that we saw in Baroque with like explosion and violence. So we have the Renaissance painting that are very, very clear, like the lights are turned on, and then we have Baroque art, which is kind of like more dark in the effects of light and flickering in. Also, the Baroque, a lot of time the paintings are just one moment at a time, just something that just happened once in a lifetime, execution of someone, crucifixion of someone. It will just happen one time, and that's the only time. Versus the Renaissance art is kind of eternal. And this scene can happen anytime. You can always have people, like sitting outside hanging with their children. And basically the characters in the Renaissance are very, very idealized. Like they look all perfect, no blemishes. And in the Baroque art, people are not, they're very realistic. As we said, Caravaggio liked to paint real people in real situations. So that things don't look perfect. You look at some Caravaggio painting, like the fruit is like basically getting old, or bread is getting stale. So everything is kind of like falling apart. It's not like a perfect basket of fruit like you will see during the Renaissance. Okay. Any questions or comments up till now? Anyone has any opinions about the three artists? Let's see in our poll if we changed anyone's mind. So Caravaggio is still leading the pack. No, Caravaggio and Gentileschi 1-1. So no changes to that. So let's talk about Rembrandt and finally see if we're going to make any change. Anyone has any comments, any questions up till now? All right, let's move into Rembrandt. Okay, so Rembrandt van Rijn, actually his last name. It's interesting, a lot of these artists, how they pick their name. He grew up next to, not far from a river. That's where he took his last name. So he's considered the greatest painter in Dutch history. So I'm giving you today all the greatest painters of each period of time. So like probably the best to talk about the most famous people. And we'll talk more about Dutch art next month. If you join me in my stream about the Dutch Golden Age. So he was born a Protestant in Leiden in the Netherlands, but his mom was a Catholic. So we can see some Catholic influence in his painting. He moved into Amsterdam in 1630 and set up a very large, successful studio. Now, it's basically, he did not just focus on one form of art. He basically did it all. So he moved between doing historical scenes and doing portraits, which he became very famous for. That's how he got his name. He did religious paintings. He did secular painting. He did myths. He did single portrait. He did group paintings. So he basically did it all. There was nothing to put his thing. Now, interesting thing, the thing that interested him the most, something he focused most of his life, he actually, around 10% of his paintings are self-portraits. He was very, very interested in his own face. And some people say, well, that's very egocentric, but it's very interesting because we can see basically all these portraits throughout the life, and we kind of can see a person aging. We can see the process that he's working through, how he looks like a young artist until we see him as an old man. So we can kind of see the process of aging. It's very, very interesting, like that movie that somebody made, like that you take a family and you can see him like in 10 years, and they filmed it year by year. Forgot the name. If I don't remember the name of the film, maybe put it in the chat box. So his face was very, very interesting to him. Now, even though he came from like a working class family, he became very, very rich and very, very successful. But he was kind of like a shopaholic. He was an auction addict. Like probably today, probably would sit on eBay every night and just, bid on a lot of things. So he almost went into complete bankruptcy, and he had to sell a lot of his art and his house, which is today a museum. And sad to say that he ended up, from being one of the most successful painters in his life in the Netherlands, ended up like being in very bad financial shape, having basically to move into like kind of like a really low housing from being one of the richest, wealthiest people in the Netherlands. So let's talk about some of his big paintings, and we'll kind of see what's Baroque about his painting. So again, notice the light coming straight in, and this is, we can see the influence of Caravaggio. So this is a self-portraiture, one of the first that he did, of a businessman named Nicolaes Ruts. And interestingly enough, this guy was in the fur business. So interesting enough, we don't know if Rembrandt's idea was, this guy's idea was to actually, for him to wear the stuff that he's actually selling. And it's interesting, these eyes are very, very penetrating eyes. And again, it's very, very humble painting. It's black and white. We're not seeing too much colors. And that's something that can give us a clue that this is more of a Protestant painting if we're switching from the Renaissance, not too many colors. And this is something that Rembrandt became very, very good at, kind of doing portraits of these successful merchants or daughters of merchants, and trying not to overdo their wealth. So we can really zoom into his eyes, and we can really see the fur kind of like standing up here. Very, very impressive kind of work. We have here another famous self-portrait that he did of Maria Tripp, from a very wealthy family in the Netherlands. Now, it's very interesting that these people are very, very wealthy, but mainly most Dutch people are Protestant, and most of them are also Calvinist. And Calvinists are trying not to show off their wealth, but they're successful. So that's kind of like something that Rembrandt and many of these Dutch artists had to work on in this painting. Simon Schamas basically says how to show off without being a show-off. Get it? Because it's kind of like you want to show your wealth, but you don't want to show too much. And this is where Rembrandt is becoming very, very good. If you look around here, this is beautiful handwork over around here. So you can see that she's kind of like that she's wealthy, but she's not overdoing it with too much bling around her. And that's something that Rembrandt learned how to do very well. So Rembrandt basically started his career in doing single portraiture, and that's how he built his reputation. So the next stage for most painters is, after you did self-portraiture, is to move into a group setting. And he did this very, very famous painting, The Anatomy Lessons of Dr. Tulp. And interestingly enough, this is Dr. Tulp over here, and he's basically doing a demonstration, an anatomy lesson. And interestingly enough, we're just seeing part of the painting. Around it, there's a whole group of people that actually paid money to see this thing. So it's very, very interesting. In Renaissance time, like opening a body was considered something very sinful, but we're moving a little bit forward, and now we have an anatomy lessons. And this Dr. Tulp guy is a very, very interesting, kind of shady guy who was like, ran a lot of different things. How good of a doctor was he? I'm not sure about that. I read one time that one of his remedies was for a patient to drink 50 cups of tea a day. I don't know if that's really healthy for you. But anyway, it's very interesting the way Rembrandt learned how to do basically a group portraiture. So everyone gets their own frame and everyone looks a little bit different. Some of these guys are looking inside the painting. Some people are looking like this guy directly at us. And over here, we're seeing the doctor performing the surgery. You can see with the hand, he's basically gesturing. He's basically pulling the string in the arms, and he's basically showing us with his hand what actually happened. So there's a demonstration in here, and Rembrandt captures this moment. It's another very famous painting. And in that stage, Rembrandt is becoming very, very successful. Over here, this is him like as a more successful person, very, very kind of looking a little bit more confident. You can see over here the sleeve across. So this is an interesting portraiture because it's very similar to a painting, a self-portraiture done by Titian. So you can kind of see the elbow coming across, getting kind of outside the frame. So Rembrandt is feeling pretty good about himself to have a very similar painting. One of the greatest Renaissance painter, Titian. If you don't know about Titian, look him up. Very, very interesting painter. All right, let's continue. Any questions, any comments up to now? All right, let's continue. Another very famous painting by Rembrandt is The Night Watch. And very interesting about this painting, it looks like these guys look like they're going to go to war, it's a militia group, and they look like so grand, like they're going to like invade like France or something. But whatever, at the end of the day, these guys are basically just going to walk around the neighborhood, just patrol the streets. But Rembrandt looked them like all the classic Baroque setting. We have motion and emotion and the drama, and all these people are moving along. Anyone can guess who's the leader of the pack? Who's the leader in this group? The leader of the Night Watch? So this guy on the right here, definitely he's got the gold uniform. So a lot of people always confuse him as the leader of the group, but definitely the guy over here, even though he's got dark clothing, he's the leader, and we can definitely see it by the hand gesture. He's basically showing the way. So everybody here is doing something a little bit different. Now, this is a very, very large portraiture. Sad to say that part of it was cut off. They cut parts of it, like 10% of the original surface. And today it basically takes an entire wall in a museum. It's still very, very large, the biggest one he did up till that stage, Rembrandt. So the Night Watch, kind of like action, motion of basically a group of people that were just like doing guard duty, but he made them look very, very glorious. And last painting by Rembrandt, we're going to talk about The Conspiracy of Claudius Civilis. This is an old Dutch story over here. And again, this is another very interesting thing. Rembrandt was commissioned to make this painting. It's going to be on the city hall, basically, of Amsterdam. It was going to take an entire wall, but they were very unhappy with this painting because, again, he made the leader of the group look so bad. Like one of his eyes is basically deformed and closed, and a lot of the people that commissioned this painting, I said, what kind of a painting are we getting from this person? So there was big disappointment. And Rembrandt got this paint, basically did not get paid for this painting. So it's, again, very, very sad. Today, by a lot of art historians, it's considered one of his best work. But at that time, people really, really were not impressed by that kind of work. And that's what tells you about art, that people a lot of times look for something beautiful and comfortable, that it's hard for them to confront something that is a little bit more less than perfect, even though if you see it's a beautiful what he's doing with the light in this painting. Sorry, like the illumination, the way it's coming. So about to wrap up, let's just talk about a couple of more artists over here. Rubens, Peter Paul Rubens is a very, very famous Flemish Baroque artist, probably the most famous in the Flemish territory, modern day Belgium. And we see Christ descending, and we can kind of see the sliding, the motion. It's a very, very classic way that Rubens is doing that. We also want to mention, of course, Baroque and absolute monarch. This is the key concept that appears in the exam description. That basically that absolute monarch employed the Baroque art to illustrate their powers. So many monarchs like Louis XIV over here really used the Baroque basically to show off that they're basically ruling by the divine right of God. And a classic example of that is the Versailles Palace, that basically showed, like, definitely see the ceiling and all the paintings and all the whole mirrors, that definitely like God is favoring this monarch, or God wants this monarch to be in power. So that's a very classic example for a Baroque palace. Also in England, Baroque eventually even reached England, who was a Protestant nation. The banqueting hall was painted by Rubens also. Charles I commissioned Rubens to make this beautiful ceiling paintings. One of them is showing Charles I's father, James I, being painted as going into heaven. Definitely divine right theory supporter. So that still stands today in England. If you ever visit that location, beautiful thing to see. We also have Velazquez in Spain, another very famous painter, standing over here, painting the royal family. And in the center, we see the princess that later on became a queen. It's very, very interesting. This painting over here in the Thai family, and Velazquez is probably one of his most famous painter. And finally, to finish up, we'll get to next month when I'll talk about other Dutch painters such as Vermeer. Some people do not really consider them as being Baroque artists because the Netherlands was Protestant, but they definitely were influenced by the Baroque art. The way we see the light coming into the window here, that's definitely an influence of the Baroque art, or the view of the city of Delft where Vermeer is from. We can definitely see the light playing a big part of that. It was one of his most famous paintings, The Milkmaid. Also, we can see the influence of light coming into the frame. So that's a very interesting thing. So again, just to wrap up, think Fiveable, follow Fiveable on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And this is my website if you want to learn about Tai Chi and other things other than Baroque art and so forth. So do we have any questions for today to finish it up? Let's see, ask a question section. I'm not seeing any question. Let's finish up seeing the polls. We still have. Oh, we're talking about Vermeer. Didn't he also do a woman holding? Yes, yeah. Again, Vermeer, I'll do a separate section just on him. I'll probably show that one too. He did almost all of his paintings were about women, and all of them were women doing day-to-day things. He has a painting of a woman playing guitar. He's got a female writing letter. He has a female working in the kitchen. So basically, all the kind of day-to-day activities that females would do. Very, very few paintings of men. He was very, very interested in women, Vermeer, in his out and the day. So yes, he has that too. I'll do a separate presentation about that. Any other questions? Okay, so thank you everyone for joining in for tonight's stream. Reminding you to follow Fiveable and try to check my streams next week about the English Civil War and the English Restoration. Very, very interesting stuff. Charles I, Charles II. So thank you everyone for coming, and have a great week.